I will be at that bandstand, whatever, you can find me. I don't care, there are more important things at stake here, I think. The systems that were put in place to protect her failed, right? And the people that are in charge of those systems are now telling us that we can't protest this tragedy. Frankly, that makes no sense to me. I live in Clapham. Posters started to go up around this time last week. And my daughter, was trying to ask me, why there were posters for a missing woman as opposed to, say, a missing cat. How do you explain that? I think seeing firsthand this week, the part where I usually take my daughter for walks or where I go running alone often, police in like forensic outfits combing your local park it really, really brings home to you the kind of horror of this and why we need to sort of be protesting. We need to be reclaiming the streets, I guess.
Yesterday evening, officers arrested a serving Metropolitan Police officer at an address in Kent in connection with the disappearance of Sarah Everard.
I know Scotland Yard have gone to great lengths to say that what happened to Sarah, or what we think happened to Sarah, is very rare. But for me, that really ignores the fact that these things happen on a sliding scale. That's why so many women feel so deeply moved, because we've all had something on that same spectrum happen to us. We've been followed home, we've been harassed, we've been groped, we've been catcalled, we've been assaulted. And that is why we're so deeply shocked, because I think for any one of us, we feel like had one element in that situation just been slightly different, if somebody hadn't come along and interrupted or whatever it might be, it could have been much more serious.
When it started to be reported that she'd gone missing, I was really shocked that in quite a few quarters of the internet, there were people saying, well, what was she doing walking home alone? And that's the thing I think that has really ignited people's fury, is the thing that, in the first reaction of the police was to say to say to people in the local area, be careful, don't go out by yourself late at night. And a friend of mine said to me, oh, well, that's just common sense though, isn't it, Bryony? There's someone's missing. And I was like, no, this isn't common. This just makes no sense to me at all, that that women should be sort of to blame for these things happening. And I certainly don't want my daughter to grow up in a world where she thinks that women are to blame if they go missing because they were out at night by themselves.
When a case like this that's very public, comes to the front of our minds, and in this case, it was because up until very recently there was a very public, appeal for information, and so I think that's why it's really emerged in the media. And I think when that comes up, it does force us to examine our own lives and our own experiences. And that's where you get people telling their stories. And of course, the sad truth of this is that we all have a story in some shape or form. I think I would go as far as to say every woman that I know has some sort of story to tell and some sort of experience. And that's the real tragedy of it. So I think the online response is equal parts sort of heartbreaking and difficult, but also I do feel a sense of empowerment when I read that. I think people need to hear these stories. Without these stories, we don't get anywhere. We don't make progress. Any progress that's made always has to have a human face. And I think that is what's happening.
There are people on social media today saying that the protest has been politicised and it should therefore be cancelled. But in my view, it needs to be politicised. What are we doing if it's not being politicised? Unless politicians get involved and we have a specific public sexual harassment offence put in place, unless more money is given to domestic abuse refuges, unless the Crown Prosecution Service is getting more rape convictions, what is it all for? It absolutely needs to be politicised.
Living next to that common, right, I would tell you last summer, right, when we were in a lockdown, that common's a huge, wide open space, right? And it was thousands and thousands of people would congregate on it during the lockdowns. It was like living next to Glastonbury Festival at some points, and the police didn't move anyone on, right? So, the argument that it's for our safety when we know that people are able to socially distance, the organisers themselves in all of their marketing material for the event were like, you must wear masks and be socially distanced, all the care has been taken. So I will be there.
I think it's also extraordinary that we're having a conversation about COVID safety when it comes to this vigil, this protest. And of course, that's incredibly important. And I will absolutely be observing social distancing myself when I'm there. But really, this conversation is about women's safety. It's not about COVID safety. And the fact that that conversation has been allowed to dominate the other, I think shows exactly how seriously we take it. And some of the lockdown policies have really affected women's safety. I've heard from countless women in my role as women's editor who haven't felt safe to walk the streets on their own when lockdown was at its harshest, or have felt that they can't go out and exercise after dark or by themselves. And there have been increased reports of harassment under those circumstances, and that's incredibly worrying. So I think one conversation shouldn't be allowed to dominate the other.